Hello, welcome to another Burgundy with Tweedy video on a park bench for a change on this very gloomy weekday afternoon. More from the Cote de Nuits village today, and this is another wine that I bought from Lay and Wheeler. I know very little about this other than what I'm about to read to you from the label, and I did a tiny bit of research. The producer is Gilles Jourdan, G-I-L-L-E-S, Gilles Jourdan. It's a 2015 vintage, and it has both a named vineyard, La Robignotte, and it also has this declaration that it is a monopole, which I believe means that named appellation, La Robignotte, is exclusively used by this producer, Jourdan, Gilles Jourdan. Normally, you'd only save the word monopole for a vineyard of some distinction. So this is something that Domaine Romanée-Conti does for some of their Vosne Romanée vineyards. They make a point of saying that there are these named appellations within Vosne Romanée that they exclusively own all of the land in. The dogs come to say hello. It seems a bit weird for one of these relatively low ranking vineyards that just comes under the Cote de Nuits village appellation. Bit strange, but anyway, so La Robignotte, I looked it up, and it's in Courgouloin, which is even further south. Well, was I possibly doing a wine from Comblanchien the other day? As a reminder, the Cote de Nuits village, there is a handful, I think 5 villages. Some of them are right at the south of the Cote de Nuits, some of them are right at the north of the Cote de Nuits, and they're villages that aren't considered prestigious enough to have their own village level appellation. They all get thrown into this bucket of Cote de Nuits village, about 5 of them, as I say. Comblanchien, Courgouloin down at the south, and I think Courgouloin is the absolute southernmost right down there, and it's practically on the border with the Côte de Beaune. If this vineyard were any further south than that, it would be in the Côte de Beaune, not in the Cote de Nuits anymore. Partly this, if I'm honest, was a sort of case filler. I always like to order 6 bottles at a time. I don't know why I've got stuck in this odd habit. It feels weird to pay the delivery fee for any fewer than 6 bottles. Perhaps it's just as simple as that. So I do always try and fill up a case of 6, but sometimes within the sort of Gevrey Chambretans and the Vosne Romanées, I can only find perhaps 3 or 4 that I really want to buy at a given time from a given merchant. So I end up with trying a couple of these things at the more modest end of the spectrum. One of those composite type corks. It is a diam, in fact. I know this thing doesn't have a decent macro function yet. There is a macro lens, apparently, an attachment I can get for this. And it's a diam 5, so that is only guaranteed for 5 years, which suggests this wine isn't really designed or intended by the producer to be aged a significant amount of time, and it's a 2015 vintage, so actually that cork is beyond its guarantee by a good 4 years. I mean, it looks in perfect shape to me. It's after all just a guarantee. There isn't a sort of a self-destruct date from diam of 5 years. It's just sort of saying that, you know, they're not going to refund the producer if it fails before 5 years, as always. Very gloomy lighting today, but say that's towards the darker end of the spectrum. It's certainly not particularly see-through. What am I getting on the nose? Haven't given it a first swirl yet. Initially sort of vegetal, not exactly sous-bois, sort of forest floor, but something a little bit like that, sort of a fresher version of sous-bois, the leaf matter from the woods that hasn't yet rotted down on the ground, leaves from bramble bushes, that kind of smell. Bit of a swirl. Now some fruits coming out. Initially I thought I had a bit of a waft of black currant there, maybe. I'm pretty sure we're going to be talking dark fruits. Yeah, again, maybe something in the realm of black currant, but there's a little bit more to it than that. Maybe blackberries to go with that brambly, undergrowthy sort of smell I was first met with. Mieux in French. I do love that word, mieux. I feel like I'm getting the slightest little hint of something vinegary, which obviously isn't a good sign, but maybe I'm imagining that. Perhaps that's just one edge of that fruit expression there. Another further whiff there, and I think I'm getting something a little bit tobacco-y now. Broadly okay. There is, again, the tiniest little twinge there of something slightly vinegary. I do wonder if this is maybe getting to be a little bit past its best. Again, that 5-year guarantee on the cork is a clue that the producer didn't really expect this to be aged much beyond 5 years, and we're a good 4 years beyond that. But it's certainly not ruined, but perhaps not at the I don't know what this would have been like 4 years earlier. The acid there was a little bit not exactly how you'd hope it to be. Relatively savoury, relatively dry, a little bit lighter in terms of style on the palate than I would expect for the colour and those initial notes of sort of blackcurrant and blackberry. Wouldn't say particularly tannic exactly, nor is it sort of silky smooth either. So there is a slightly abrasive edge there, and that could just be that interestingly ever so slightly funky acidity. I've mulled this over for a few minutes and also had a look online for any tasting notes. There don't seem to be a lot actually, and they're all in French, interestingly. So I don't know if this wine usually ships to the UK. I couldn't find many English tasting notes, but based on my basic French, I think we are at least in agreement about the fruit character. It is sort of blackcurranty, and there were a couple of other hints from other tasting notes that suggested people didn't think this had perhaps aged as well as it could have done. Not this particular vintage, different vintages. I think on the palate, that odd sort of vinegary twang I was talking about before, that has dissipated now, and that may have just been an issue of me acclimatizing to the wine, I don't know. But I would say still there isn't a huge amount of fruit character there on the palate. So there is that nice blackcurranty, blackberry sort of nose, but then doesn't really translate to much of a fruit character on the palate. It's pretty dry, it's pretty savory, a little bit restrained to me on the palate, I would say. So I kind of suspect this is either a little bit past its best, or it's kind of, sometimes you hear wine types talk about wine sort of going to sleep for a time during their aging. They have an initial kind of peak where they seem to be improving, and then they go a bit dull for a few years, and then they perhaps wake up again and start to get all those tertiary notes they call, the sort of things that only really develop with age. So it may not be completely past its best. I mean, I think the 5-year Diam cork is sort of a suggestion that it isn't really intended to be aged for a long time, as I keep saying, and perhaps if you really knew your stuff, you might be able to predict that this would then come out of that brief lull that it's in at some point and start improving again. But right now, yeah, tiny bit underwhelming. Certainly not undrinkable, certainly not unpleasant. And this is a relatively budget appellation. I can't remember the exact price, but I'll put that on screen. Certainly wasn't a big spendy wine by Burgundy standards. So I wouldn't say it's a crushing disappointment. I didn't really have high expectations here. But there you go. Interesting to try something different. Not sure I'd plump for this again, of this particular vintage at least. Maybe the younger, fresher ones are a bit more to my taste, perhaps. Anyway, cheers.